right, welcome back to SketchUp Talk, the podcast where we talk about SketchUp, obviously. That's why we named it SketchUp Talk and not Bob's Crab Shack. I don't know. I didn't have anywhere to go with that one. I'm your host, Aaron, and with me today is Chris Brashar. I'm saying Brashar, right?
Yes.
Okay. I say that because even now I hear people we work with say Brashar. And I always, every time I say Brashar, I'm like, was that right or not?
Yeah, I stopped correcting a long time ago, but
yeah,
you go with what feels right.
Chris is our education programs coordinator. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you.
All right, so first thing we do is just clarify, absolutely, what is an education programs coordinator?
An education programs coordinator is a title that I kind of came up with to help encapsulate all that I do. And I'm one of a team of education program managers and coordinators here at SketchUp in Trimble. So, it's kind of a title that encapsulates a lot of different areas.
So when we talk, we have a couple terms we use here in the SketchUp team at Trimble, and that is learning versus education. So when we talk about learning, we're talking about like our SketchUp campus, our regular short form videos. When we talk about education, we're actually talking about involvement with schools. Yes.
To put it briefly, yes. It's all about outreach. What we do, our goal is to engage with the educational ecosphere. So that's everything from kindergarten all the way through university and beyond.
Okay, I just don't want people to get confused thinking, man, everybody they have here teaches SketchUp. But
well, yes, I'm lucky enough to get the opportunity to do that, but is outside the normal boundaries of what education kind of focuses on.
You are also in charge of Trimble's Visiting Professionals program. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, I am.
Can you tell us a little bit about the VPP for short?
Sure, yes.
Visiting Professionals program is too many words.
It's a lot to say, yes. The VPP for short. The VPP, what it is, it's a program that really aims to kind of connect industry with the classroom. And what I mean by that is it's not a sales pitch. This isn't us going into a university classroom saying, buy SketchUp, use SketchUp, 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 SketchUp. Granted, we all love SketchUp and we are there to advocate on the behalf of SketchUp and other Trimble solutions. What we're really doing is trying to inspire those students and that faculty, get the students excited about the technologies that they'll be working with in the workflows and the world of construction, building, and design that they'll be impacting when they graduate and move on professionally.
So what areas of people come into to speak for the VPP? Sure.
So the VPP, the way it works, it's not just a SketchUpper such as myself up there in front of a classroom lecturing. It's actually a robust grouping of different professionals from myriad industries that I have the pleasure of working with. Within the program, we have professional architects, interior designers, stage set designers from Hollywood, construction managers, engineers, and some other et cetera as well in there. And what these folks do, many of them, some of the SketchUp audience will be familiar with because a lot of them have been presenting at Base Camp for a long time. We have names like Dan Tall, Dan Brown, in the program, Tammy Cody, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you can visit the VPP page and see all of the visitors that we have. Anyhow, so we bring them into the classroom, and they're really the ones engaging with the students, sharing their workflows, talking about how they incorporate SketchUp and other Trimble tools, if they do, into their workflows, and how those workflows have essentially saved them time and hours in what they do.
So that's awesome. Do you work with only specific schools? I mean, how do you decide what school you're going to take Dan Brown to, for example?
Sure. So when it comes to finding the schools we visit, there's a lot of different ways. We have schools that apply directly online through the application on the website. We have schools that we meet in our everyday interactions. When we go to conferences, we'll talk about the program and find students and instructors and faculty that are all interested. And it just starts with a conversation with a stakeholder from the university, and we go from there. And then we will match them with a professional that kind of has stake in that industry or experience in that industry. So we wouldn't send, a Hollywood set designer to a engineering classroom, for instance. We'll try to match up an engineer with an engineer focus, or someone with an art history to a theater program.
That's great. So if somebody's listening right now and they're connected to a school and they're like, whoa, I got to do this, I got to get a professional in, what's the best way for them to reach out and become part of your program?
Sure. The best way is to visit the Visiting Professionals Program site. It exists in two places, but if you visit SketchUp.com and you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see the programs that we run for education. The Visiting Professionals Program is right there. You can click on it and go right to the page.
That's the important stuff. It's like when you make a drink and all the good stuff settles to the bottom.
That's right.
That's the good stuff.
That's
The
right.
bottom
That's
of the
good
website.
stuff.
Always go there first.
Always go there first. That's where we list a few of our other educational programs as well. Our kindergarten through 12th grade grant program, which gives schools access to SketchUp Pro at no cost. Public schools, that is. And lots of good stuff.
And you said, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. There was a second way besides the website.
Oh, there's also a Trimble Visiting Professionals Program site through the Trimble site. So this Visiting Professionals Program it's mostly SketchUp centric at this point, but we also focus on other Trimble products such as the Tekla structural modeler for concrete and for steel fabrication. Also, a lot of our estimating suites and softwares, our virtual and mixed reality solutions for Trimble Connect. And there's a few others there that I'm not remembering right now, but I'm sure I will. There's about 20 different solutions from the Trimble brand that I get to work with.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's not super recent, but more recent. The VPP grew out of SketchUp, but it's actually now spreading and pulling in more of Trimble.
It exactly. Started with architectural focus, which naturally lends itself to SketchUp as a tool. But we found that we were being pulled into more directions at some point, a lot of interest with the construction management programs. And while they are using SketchUp, certainly they're also using a lot of these other solutions. So it just made sense to start bringing in professionals that are versed in those solutions as well.
That's cool. Just to jump back to something you mentioned earlier, because you did mention the K-12 program. So you mentioned that we have a grant. So public schools can get SketchUp for free?
That's right. They sure can. If you visit the same section at the bottom where all the good stuff lives, there's a link out to the K-12 grants. And what that does essentially gives you a connection to your state representative. Every state has a director of technology within the school system, and they're the ones that can vet and help onboard that license for your school. More importantly, well, not more importantly, but the newer news in that front is we're also promoting SketchUp for Schools, which most people probably have heard of at this point. SketchUp for Schools is a different solution than the SketchUp Grant program. SketchUp for Schools is our web-based application that's available for schools that are G Suite schools using Chromebooks, and for Microsoft schools that are using those two platforms for educating.
Which is great because, schools work with what they got, and a lot of times they're not looking at 3D design capable hardware, and that takes the load off.
And just like SketchUp's always been somewhat agnostic with platforms, we want to be available to everybody. Same thing goes for our educational outreach and our educational tools. We want to make sure that schools that have gone on to use Chromebooks as their main platform have access to SketchUp, and it's been a pretty popular hit too with those schools.
That's great. So you mentioned earlier that this title, your education programs coordinator, was a title you made up. So what did you do before? How did you start at SketchUp, and what brought you here? I guess I don't even know exactly because you were working on the VPP program when I started.
Really?
Or maybe you were just starting into that. You were involved with EDU.
Yeah. When I started on the EDU department here at SketchUp, we had two people. So the VPP program did exist, but we were only running, say, about a half dozen visits a year at that time. I was also running that grant program,
Right.
And outreach opportunities, going to educational conferences, doing training at those conferences for educators on SketchUp. So there was a lot to
how many
juggle.
sessions, how many VPP sessions do you do a year now?
And right now, I do about 20 to 25 a year.
Oh, wow. So a couple every month.
A couple every month. And I don't
Wow.
attend all those things, thankfully.
Yeah, you'd be very busy.
Exactly. But yeah, we do support about 20 to 25 a year right now.
That's great.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
I was very curious. That's awesome.
Sure. So your question, how did I get involved with SketchUp here? My background, I've actually been with Trimble for 12 years, starting in 2007 with Trimble. And for many years, I was over on the corporate side on corporate finance.
Oh.
Yeah, for about the first 6 years of my Trimble career, that's where I was.
See, that validates my theory that still very few people actually intend to end up in software. I think now there's a handful of like developer types who go to school for it.
Sure.
But I think like 80-90% of people are like end up in software some other way.
Yeah. It was definitely a roundabout. Ironically, what I do now is more related to what I studied in school than the finance was. So
what did you study in school?
A couple things before I finally found my fit, but I studied English, literature, and education for a few years. Decided that teaching wasn't for me, as much as I love the idea of the 3-month summers. I also
That's a perk.
Yes, that is a perk, but there were a few downsides to that for me personally, that I wanted to work in education, but I thought there might be a different way for me. What I ended up majoring in though was industrial design.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, learning how all the shop tools worked and
That's
designing,
fun.
making furniture and working with plastics and, all that good stuff, everything that a maker should know.
Well, hey, since we've detoured there just for a moment anyhow, how much makering do you get to do? How much you get to apply your industrial design knowledge nowadays, now that you're working in the EDU group?
Oh, funny you should say that. You should bring it up. Thankfully and luckily, a lot of schools that I go to visit have a STEM or maker push in the last few years. So most have a fabrication lab where their students are learning CNC processes, 3D printing processes, laser cutting, all the things that I learned back in the day and still continue to learn. There's been a lot of improvements since I was in school on those things. But anyhow, so when I go to those schools, a lot of times I'm asked, how would SketchUp be used in these processes? And so I've been learning the last few years how SketchUp works with those processes and how those workflows can be achieved. So not only do I get to share that with the schools, but let's say a small amount of my time here at SketchUp goes to tinkering around, making content, designing within SketchUp things to fabricate.
That's good. Always, at least holding on to that, right? I mean, you went to school for it. You gotta.
That's right. You gotta try.
Little.
Yeah, my time's a little pushed. I'm a little envious of some of our SketchUppers' outputs here. Not to mention names, but Aaron has some prolific output, so we're all striving towards that at some point, right?
I mean, you got to keep yourself busy, right? Don't want to be bored.
That's right.
All right, so here you are, coordinator for the educational programs, coordinator for the VPP program. Why do you do this? What do you get out of this every day that you come in? When you work on this stuff, what are you seeing that makes you go, yep, I did this, I want to come back, I want to do it again tomorrow?
Sure. It's a great question. And not one I'm asked often enough, unfortunately, because it's something I love to proliferate on when asked at parties or family get-togethers. And I'm sure I bore my family to death. So being with
everybody here's dialing in and
perfect,
right? You're intentionally coming here. So
well, all right. Well,
here you go.
Normally, right now, I pour the gravy on and I say, "Sit down for a minute. And I'll tell you all about it." And eyes glaze over. But anyway, I've done marketing and sales before, and never for different companies, and never been really fulfilled in those roles. when I came over to the education team on SketchUp, I was weary of doing anything that was sales really. Not that anything wrong with sales, SketchUp's a great product, and really, if I were to do sales for SketchUp, I'm sure I would love it because I believe in it so much. However, what really fulfills me about my position here is that, well, it's a marketing position. It also allows me to connect with the user community, to engage with people that have stake in the game, skin in the game rather, who are using SketchUp to create, to build a foundation for themselves, really, whether it's, people that are taking a SketchUp class to, go out on their own and be an interior designer and work for themselves, or students that are studying architecture, landscape architecture, and really just trying to bring their vision to life, being able to go out and share workflows or even little tips and tricks that help them get a step closer to what they're trying to achieve, and then seeing, their jaws drop when they see that shortcut that they never knew about, or when everything clicks into place for them and they see how one tool relates to another, or one workflow can help them get to where they want to be. Rambling on this, but the point is, when that all clicks into place and I see that they're excited by that and they're happy and they're thankful, they come up to me after and shake my hand and say, thank you. This is great. This was just what I needed. You don't get that in a lot of other places you work. So that's probably the thing that keeps me so engaged with what I do.
That's awesome. And it's the ability to make a change in somebody's life and what they do. That's pretty cool. And especially at a formative time like that, where they're students and they're just about to launch into the real world.
Yeah, exactly. Students. And it's funny because it also makes a difference for the visitors that I take into schools, who are sometimes a little reticent or hesitant about speaking in front of a classroom of college students. A lot of questions I get on their first time out is, what's in it for me? How is this helping me to progress as a professional? But what they find after just the first few minutes is that engaging with students is hugely beneficial. They get asked the questions that keep them engaged in what they're doing, keep them excited about what they're doing. And for a lot of those professionals, they've told me afterwards that it's really reinvigorated for them, the reasoning why they're in the business they're in to begin with. Not to mention, a lot of firms that are professionals represent do end up hiring interns from these schools just from a visit that we initiate. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, I know I've been on one VPP trip where I talked to architectural students about SketchUp. And it really is cool. I mean, I think it's easy to get, I don't want to use the term jaded, but I think when you're a professional who's making something, it's really easy to get head down and focus on your workflow, and that's everything. So I think that's pretty cool that, like you said, it's the whole thing is geared towards helping the student, but that professional coming in gets an opportunity to step outside of their bubble and maybe help somebody. That's something I had never considered. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it was fun because it was a different kind of. The thing I like about those students, and this was college that I went to, Amherst. Is that right?
Where did we go? Auburn.
I knew it was an A word. But the thing that I liked about it is I think a lot of the professionals in the learning group here work with adults. So these are people who are those practicing professionals, the ones who are doing it, and something happens to you when you're an adult and you forget how to learn. And this isn't me just talking out of my whatever. This is actually proven. I mean, people, they don't retain that ability, or they don't retain the tools that you need to learn something new on a regular basis. And that was very cool. That's why I was so thankful to go on that trip, because it was really cool to talk to somebody who was like, they weren't afraid to ask questions. They weren't afraid to look stupid. They weren't, they wanted to know something. They would ask a question and I'm like, I'm sure tons of people have thought that, but never wanted to ask. And there's something exciting about that. And I could absolutely see where you're coming from. That is a really cool arena to get to spend time in.
Yeah, it really is, and there's something, it's a little different about those students when, like you hit the nail on the head. They're not afraid to ask questions that might otherwise seem stupid or like something they should know. I mean, their stakes in it are a little different when they're, just learning the tools and applying it to their education. It's not something that their job relies on, so to speak. There's not that same professional pressure. There's a lot more of that inquisitiveness, I guess you could say.
Well, and I think with if you're a student, you don't know. So I think there's no danger of going somewhere wrong because you don't have a workflow that you're trying to optimize. You don't have a workflow, so you can ask any question and try this. And I think that's cool. I think that once we get as adults who are like in that design process, this is how I do it. I don't stop to think about what's over here, what can I do over here, anything like that. Everything is just
sure.
So yeah, I try to fine tune my workflow, but I don't look outside the box potentially.
Sure. Yeah, definitely agreed. And not to mention that, these are their own projects. These are things that they're supporting the ideas that came from them. It's not someone else handing them blueprints designed by somebody else saying, here, mock these up, in a software. This is something that was born from them. The idea from conception to creation, to execution is all coming from them. So they definitely have more heart in it as well, I'd say. Well, not to say professionals don't that are in the working world, but I think you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I think with professional design arenas, there's this thing, right, where you go to school and like it is your design, but then as soon as you graduate, you're probably going to go work on somebody else's design for a while. And if you're lucky, you work your way up to your design again, and people are working on your stuff then.
Of course, then you have clients, so your design's never fully your own design, right? Yeah.
You go to art school.
Yeah.
No, don't do that. I mean, do. Hey, I mean,
art school.
It's all good. Art school's good.
Yeah.
Architecture school, whatever. Do your school. Do your thing.
Do your school. Stay in school, kids.
That's right.
It's something else. And I tell you, just a side note here that's been really impactful for me, who's been using SketchUp before Trimble acquired SketchUp, is, just my own little personal victory with these or a takeaway from these is that every time I go on these visits, whether it be, seeing Mike Brightman's workflow to seeing, again, Dan Tall or John Altschuld or John Brock is not to mention, there's so many names I'm leaving out here of our professionals that are just awesome at what they do with SketchUp. But every time I go, it's like a masterclass for me. I see all these great, savants in SketchUp doing something a little differently, and I get to pick up on some of that. So it's really been, again, a masterclass for me with every single visit on helping me with my SketchUp skills.
So we're touching on, so where we're at here now recording, we're in the process of planning Basecamp for 2020. And that's kind of like your whole year of VPP condensed into 1 week. But I always think that because you're on the content team with me, and those of you listening, one of the things that we do in the content team is we look at all these people who want to present and we work with them to help fine tune their presentations. And I always look at it as, oh man, I want to go to this class, I want to go to this class, I want to go to this class, and I basically fill up my schedule with 2 classes every session that I want to go to. And then I end up going like 3 the entire time because I'm working. I mean, it's I guess one of the bad things. So I'm envious of your description of that, of being able to go in and listen to the full presentation of any of those guys.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I'm pretty lucky, and I don't mention that aspect of it too much because I'm, worried that other people start to, try to hone in on that. Hey, let me come with you in this.
You probably need help. I should probably come with
your hands. Yeah. No, it's great. Learn a lot. Sometimes I get a little, busy with the logistics of, running around and helping proctor or recording. Sometimes we record these sessions, and I'm the cameraman for that. So I'm paying attention to the equipment a lot of times, but 90% of the time I say I've got an ear on what's going on and absorbing that knowledge as well.
So what's the process like? How do you find those professionals? I mean, I know we talked about how a school could get the program in, but how do schools say, I want to go hear from this guy, or how does that happen?
Sure. So all the professionals in the program are listed on the site with a little brief bio, work history about them. So schools who are interested can kind of look through those and find the relevant presenters. But finding new presenters has kind of been an organic process for the last few years. Whereas, I'd meet them at base camp. And say, hey, your presentation is amazing. I like what you're doing. I think students could really benefit from it. Do you have any interest in working that circuit, in presenting to students and to bringing what you know into the classroom and sharing that? And most times, people are very receptive to that. The SketchUp community and most of our power users are super excited about sharing what they know. So that's historically been the way. But, people that have the chops, presentation and SketchUp skills that are interested in being part of the program. We're always looking for new professionals to come in and share what they know with the educational community. So if people are interested in that, I would definitely recommend getting a hold of us. And, we don't have an official form for that right now, but they could always just email me at education@sketchup.com with the headline, VPP, possible presenter, or VPP, presenter candidate, or something along those lines.
That's awesome. And we'll put those links in our notes as well. So you did mention that you were using SketchUp before you started working at SketchUp. Where was that at?
Sure. So back in my school days, I had to learn CAD and technical drafting, which was horrendously boring, doing elevations and, all these things, the flyouts by hand and whatnot. Anyhow, when I was working for SketchUp, Trimble, let me go back here. Working for Trimble, before we acquired SketchUp, I got into 3D printing. Pretty hardcore, pretty fast, fell in love with the idea, the magic of it before I knew all the hardships and the realities of it. But I went ahead and acquired a 3D printer, and I was looking for a faster way to make my creations realities, bring them to the printer, because CAD and SolidWorks was prohibitive, and I just figured what's going to be the fastest way to do this. And I remembered seeing SketchUp at a board meeting for my homeowners association, where we were drawing up new plans for new porch lights, and an accountant that was our vice president showed us what it would look like. He said, I found this free online software called SketchUp that I used, and I remembered that one after I acquired the 3D printer a few years later, and thought, let me check that out. Can that do 3D printing? And it was all trial by fire, but between downloading SketchUp and installing it, I had something ready to print within a few hours. So for me, that was a huge win, and kind of took off with it from there. Got some small projects to do through an entrepreneurial spirit of mine for some friends and for some small companies, and used SketchUp to make all those designs, and then took it to 3D printing and mold and cast making. But SketchUp was the tool that got me there the fastest.
That's cool. It's always amazing to hear how people picked it up, because it's very few people are like, well, I went out looking for something like, it's always, well, yeah, I saw it here. Or,
sure.
I remember hearing about this, or I had a friend who used it, or it's pretty neat.
Yeah, it was. And, it's funny too, because when I first thought, let me check it out, it might do it, I was very skeptical, because I thought, I believe it's a lightweight modeler. I don't think it can do what I need for solid modeling for 3D printing. But no, I checked it out. I read, Googled it, and sure enough, it worked just fine.
That's awesome. All right, Chris, we've gotten to the portion of the show where we do a little thing called How Do You SU?
Ooh.
All right, so the way this is going to work is we're going to dive into your personal relationship with the thing called SketchUp. So we have a couple questions here. They're going to kind of let us peek into how you use SketchUp and what you actually have done with it in the past. All right, so first question. What do you remember as being your first SketchUp model?
My first official SketchUp model was a coat hook, a branded little coat hook for printing that I ended up selling to a company that was looking for some custom office furniture for their cubicles. And I did a run of probably, I don't even remember now, in the low hundreds of this part, but it was just the one little design I made in SketchUp. It was pretty easy, but of course this was before I understood grouping, so I fought with it a bit to get the 3D text in there and figure out how all that worked.
So is that, and then you 3D printed all of them, or did you?
No, I 3D printed 12 of them and then made a silicone mold and poured resin out of for the remaining sets.
That's not a bad way to start.
That's right. Yeah, trial by fire. Yeah.
So what is the most recent SketchUp file you've worked on? Either you finished or what are you working on now?
Sure. A lot of the SketchUp files I work on these days are collaborative. Meaning it's for bigger projects, and I have other stakeholders helping and designers. The last model I had open that I was actively editing was a city model of Vancouver, utilizing some aspects from Dan Tull's Placemaker for the data, and I'm working on a fabrication project using that data.
Wow.
Top secret.
Building a city, huh?
Building a city, so to speak. Yeah. Tiny city.
Little city. Yeah, it takes so long to print full-size buildings with a
FDM
printer.
A little bit of time.
All right. What is the most impactful SketchUp model you've had, either on you or a model you made that had an impact on someone else?
Ooh, that's a great question.
Why, thank you.
It's hard to narrow that down. There's been a lot of projects I've been involved in that have been impactful for one person or another for different reasons. And there's some I'm not sure because of NDAs and whatnot that I'm not sure I can even talk about.
I'll talk about the ones you can talk about.
I'm not sure which ones those are. Okay. There's a few. Let me start with one that you actually helped with a few years ago. We did a 4 foot by 8 foot diorama of downtown Washington, D.C., of the National Mall and surrounding areas. We ended up 3D printing about, I'd say, 60 of the landmark buildings and CNC milling the outbuildings out of rigid foam. Then going back and LED lighting all those primary buildings and wiring them up to arcade buttons so that students could come in and press the button and light up the White House or the Washington Monument. And all those buildings were modeled or refined in SketchUp by myself and by you. You did a lion's share of a lot of that work, and seeing how much parents and students enjoyed that exhibit, we took that to the International Science and Technology Show, the National Science Fair in Washington, D.C. that runs every other year. And I can't remember the exact acronym for that show right now. It's been a few years since we were there. But anyhow, seeing how much that meant to people was really, really neat for me personally. There's been other projects where showing someone their work, their design work in SketchUp full scale in AR, augmented reality, has brought tears to that designer's eyes. And seeing that has also really been pretty impactful for me, not because they were so sad, but because they were so impacted and happy that sad people make me happy. No, they were tears of joy.
Their pain.
So seeing them and asking them, why are you okay? Is it making you nauseous? What's going on right now? And them saying, no, it's real now. Seeing it like this, it makes it real. Before it was actually built out.
That's cool.
Yeah, that was really cool. So those types of things are always impactful. We did one project too where we worked with a local veterinarian on scanning for a dog who had who needed a prosthetic for a paw that had some problems. And we went in and 3D scanned that dog and took it into SketchUp, the output into SketchUp, and started modeling prostheses to work on. And that particular project for me was a little bit of a disappointment. Never made it to execution because the dog ended up being adopted out before we were done. But just the potential for impact there. And for me, that was a big piece of learning that SketchUp really had no understood limitations. I thought I knew its limitations before that project. And after that project, I realized that I'll never fully know its limitations, because where there's a will in SketchUp, there's usually a way.
That's so true. All right. This is where you get to be you can puff yourself up a little bit. What's the best model you've worked on? Either where it's like sense of gratification in finishing it, or you didn't think you'd get to do it and you did, or you just look back and you're like, man, that was cool.
Oh, there have been a few. The one that's popping to mind most right now is something that I've recently come back to working on in larger scale. It was a project using topographical data files. This workflow was shared with me by sketchlist.net, Eric Schemmelfinnig, who kind of showed me how this could potentially work. Basically, I took topographic data of the Front Range here in Colorado, Boulder County, where we're located, our office is located, and brought that into SketchUp and cut it with the geometry of a Colorado state map and was able to 3D print that out in all of its corresponding colors and make fridge magnets out of it. So it's 3D topography map of Colorado. It was the thing that was so fulfilling about this was getting my head around the workflow and getting it to finally being able to click the mouse and watching it come together and testing it with Solid Inspector and it's saying, this is a solid, and me almost crying my own tears of joy because it took me a little while to figure out how to get there.
That's awesome. And I've seen that is an impressive, well, I haven't seen it because you're working on a bigger version than the refrigerator magnets. This is going to be like bigger. Bigger. Maybe we'll share it with everyone when it's done. Come hang it in the office or something. Keep an eye on social media for that one. All right, time to get self-deprecating.
All right.
What is the worst model you've ever worked on?
Oof, I don't know that we have the time for that, man. I've got a few. Probably the first model ever was the worst one. And that was, again, before I understood some of the fundamental model organization techniques. But every once in a while, I still surprise myself with a model that I'm ashamed of. Like, why? What was I thinking when I went into this? Like, could have made this so much easier on myself.
It's never too late to screw up.
That's true. It's never too late to screw up. It's never too late to start over either. They're all learning experiences, even the horrible ones, where I'm able to stand back and say, okay, now I know what not to do. Let's try one of these other 13 ways and see which one of those I like.
Good answer. All right, last question. You get to spend a lot of time with people learning SketchUp. So what is the number one thing you see people doing wrong, or the best advice you want to give to people learning SketchUp?
Oh, best advice. Oh, that's a tough one too. Take your time in the beginning, make those mistakes. Don't be scared to make those mistakes because that is how you learn. I definitely recommend trying to make sure that all your lines, at least until you're doing organic modeling, all your right angles are on axes. Make sure that when I discovered that you could actually temporarily color your edges by axes, that was a huge help for me in making my models solid for 3D printing. I come at this at a different approach. Most of the projects I'm doing are for fabrication, so they're 3D printing or laser cutting, and it's a little different than the architectural modeling approach or the conceptualization approach because the details matter, I would say, a little bit more. The internal structures of a piece of geometry matter a little bit more. So find a couple of plugins that you can rely on. Edge Tools helps me out quite a bit, but also understand what those plugins are doing. Be able to do that work without those plugins if you ever had to. Mm-hmm. It just helps to get your head around where those errors are coming from. That's just a bit of the advice. I'm sure everyone that models in SketchUp could probably write a book full of key sage advice. But again, take your time, use the resources that we have. We have some great resources, pretty prolific lately with all the work Aaron puts into those resources, the quick wins, the skill builder videos, the LMS. Utilize them. We create them for our users. And every time I go out and show a school or a student that those resources exist, a lot of people are surprised that they didn't know about them, and they make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good answers across the board. And that wraps it up for us. So, and is there anything else you want to throw out there?
SketchUp for education, SketchUp for schools, Trimble for education. Trimble's doing some great things with the rest of their solutions too. Check out their website. We're going to a lot of universities and showing how SketchUp works with the laser scanners and point cloud data, and how it does a lot more than it used to for these industries. And just want people to be aware that there's more to SketchUp than you probably even suspect.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you very much, Chris. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
And thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.